I'm being joined now on the news at 10 by Mr. Kyari Bukar, the former chairman of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group, for more insights into the performance of the economy since independence. Thank you for joining us on the news at 10.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I really wanted to start with a question that we were discussing just before, we came on. But let's just begin with a summary of Nigeria's economic history since independence. Bosun talked about a boom and a bust.
That is typical of, globally, we go through booms and busts. But in the case of Nigeria, there have been, the cycles were more frequent than even the global boom and bust cycles. But ideally, it's something that happens once every 7 to 10 years. And in our situation, usually it is linked directly to the price of oil. Anytime price of oil shoots up, even if it is for a short period of time, there would be that rosy picture of how the economy is going to be, and then we go into town like a drunken sailor, thinking that nothing is going to happen tomorrow. So we do not, as a nation, save for the rainy day. And then as soon as oil prices start to decline, then we go into a panic mode and go on a borrowing binge, which basically means we dig ourselves further down as the saying goes, you should stop when you have gone too far. And those lessons, unfortunately, have never hit us so that we adjust ourselves. There has been an attempt during Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's term as finance minister, where we had the excess crude account as a mechanism for savings down the road, as well as the act that created the NSIA, which is the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, that's supposed to also be investing for future generations. Unfortunately, even that seed corn, we tend to raid them much more frequently than we ought to.
I'm curious to know what season we are in, what season you think we're in, and if you see any ray of hope, getting us through this season.
It's actually very tough to characterize. I think one of the questions you asked earlier before we got on the air was whether we are out of recession.
Yeah.
Technically speaking, as far as economists are concerned, yes, we are. We got into recession mid-2016 and got out by early 2017, right? Because, but the problem is that how fast are we growing? And that's very stark in the realities of our growth situation. Our annual growth rate in 2014 was 6.1%, GDP growth rate. And the population of Nigeria was growing on the average at about 2.6%. Now, that was the only year in the last 5 years that we have had a growth greater than our population growth. The year 2015, it was more or less 2.7 or so percent. The year 2016 was negative 1.5%. And then the remaining 3 or so years, we've had approximately 2% to 2%. And that means that we have been growing at a negative rate, meaning that every year the average Nigerian is getting poorer than they were a year ago. And that's the reality.
Yeah, so how easy would it be engineering a new direction for the economy?
I will give credit to what the president mentioned in the speech yesterday, which was the fact that we need to focus on diversifying the economy. I think the real situation is that it is not that the economy is not diversified, it is that the federal government's revenue base is not diversified. And to that extent, those of the states as well. So the key is, how do we boost the economy to the extent that what the governments collect in taxes and levies would basically be adequate enough for us to meet our expenditure source. Because right now, as we look at the last 3 or so years of this government, we've been borrowing more every year. In dollar terms, I believe that in 2015, total debt, both domestic and foreign, was around $33 billion. The foreign debt was less than $5 billion. Last year, 2018, the foreign debt had gone up to $20 billion, and the domestic debt was around $44 billion. So total debt was in the order of about $60 billion, which is nearly 2 times what we had 4 years ago. Now, the problem is not the debt. The problem is the debt servicing. And the debt service ratio had gone from about 30% 4 or 5 years ago to over 65% this last year. And it might even go higher. Now,
and we might be borrowing more.
We may, that's right. In fact, we are now discussing about $2.5 billion from the World Bank, which is going to hit us this year. So essentially, and then when you look at the revenue, budgeted revenue to actual revenue that the government had that the federal government had, it is about half of the budgeted revenue that we collect, which means that the problem with Nigeria is collection of revenue, blocking of revenue leakages, and also living beneath
within our means.
Exactly. So we have to cut our cord according to our size. And that may actually mean taking some drastic steps, if you ask me. Because if it were a privately run company, they have to take some drastic measures in terms of cutting their expenses and making things more efficient.
I think the former Minister of the Economy, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, also gave that advice about cutting our coat according to our cloth. Thank you so much, Mr. Kyari Bukar, for speaking with us on the News at 10.
You're welcome.
A pleasure.